agreed from our previous video that we would just create a linked node member variable. Let's just have a quick look. Right, that's all we agreed with the StackNode. Now we come to the really fundamental question is, how do we actually link them? If I take a particular one, what am I going to link it to? Which node am I going to link it to? The one that's about to arrive, the one on top of it, or the one underneath it? Or do I start with the first and I link upwards? Let's kind of talk this thing through so we can start asking ourselves a crucial question about how we intend to code it. So, for example, if I take my table and I have my first stack node, let's give it an ID of 1 just for the sake of argument, okay? And we'll try to keep it close to the visual metaphor of a table. So I've added my first stack node, and in there I've got a little linked node. I'm going to use a dot because I can use an arrow and a dot. So that's the first item. So one approach I might take is if I add another node, a stack node, and I give it the number 2, you might think, okay, why don't we add that so this node points to that, and if it's at the top, it points to nothing, it points to null, right? So now this one has become our top. You think, okay, what would be the advantages of coding it that way, and what would be the disadvantages of coding it that way? That's a question that you need to explore. There's an alternative way of doing it, and there's a couple of questions that you need to know. The top is absolutely critical. The first may seem important, but is it as critical to you when you start coding it? Okay, how are you going to bind these nodes together? That's one mechanism. You could start there. Let's have a look at another mechanism for it. Let's see what you make of this one. Right, so I add a stack node, okay, and all I'm talking about at this stage is linking that node to another one when we create an object. Each of them have an ID. We're not doing anything more complicated than that. We're just trying to think through. This first one I've popped on, I give it the ID. Its linked node is pointing to nothing at the moment, right? Because it's the only one there, and it's at the top of my stack. When I add, let's shift it up here. When I add a second one, right, this is no longer the top. This becomes the top, and I'll give this a ID 2. Now I have a question. If I stick to my previous way, my previous suggestion that I'm working from the bottom and going upward to link these nodes, then here's a question for you. When you have your top node, that's the one that you would remove. That's the one you need to grab, and you need to be able to remove it from the list. And what happens with your code is if you remove this top one, you pop it out, you need to allow that bottom one to revert back to being the top. Then when you add, you will link it up again. So maybe going upwards isn't the right way to do it. Maybe the right approach is to go downwards from the top. So you have two possible ways you can code the stack. Start from the bottom, link them upwards as you go, or whichever one it is. Now, if you only have the one and you're linking downwards, clearly the first one will always, its linked node will always be null. And that may be a clever way of identifying it's right at the bottom or it's the last one in the stack. This way could also work, right? And what I'd like you to do is think about this when you start coding it. What we're going to do is build up the code. We are not going to, at this particular stage, force you to code in a particular way, but to encourage you to think about this.